everyone, and welcome to another webinar from the DNAfit Education Institute. My name is Craig Pickering. I'm Head of Sports Science at DNAfit, and today in this webinar we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about the DNAfit Code of Practice, and we're also going to talk about the DNAfit Marketing Guidelines. So why are we going to talk about these things? Well, we get a lot of questions about both these two things, both from personal trainers and also from clients. People want to know, why should they choose DNAfit over other companies? Is there anything that distinguishes them, two different companies apart? And we can give you some sort of ideas about what to say there, what you can and can't say there. There's also a lot of questions about ethics within genetics and, is it safe, is it valid, all those type of things. And again, we'll cover those issues a little bit here so that people can be a bit more secure, because we really do want to look after both you, the trainers, and also the end user, the clients that you have as well. And there's also a lot of confusion with regards to the whole genetics sphere. So what you can tell, what you can't tell from a test, what it all means, and how much you need to sort of pay attention to all those things in it. So really good to go over those ideas and make sure everyone's clear on it all. So types of things we'll talk about. We'll revisit the DNAfit scientific criteria. In every presentation or every education program that we run, we go over those reasons. But it's always good to, again, just to go over them so everyone's aware of what they are and everyone's on the same page. Then we'll go through the personal genetics code of practice, which has been put forward by DNAfit to help protect consumers and the industry as well. We'll talk about the DNAfit marketing guidelines, which kind of few guidelines about what you can say, what you can't say, how you should market DNAfit to your clients, just in order to protect yourself and them as well. And then we'll look at some next steps, so how DNAfit can help you in moving forward in this area. So like I said, we'll start off with the DNAfit science guidelines. So for every gene or SNP that we test for in our panel, we require a large base of evidence to select. And that's really important. We have to have a minimum of 3 peer-reviewed studies. And that's because we don't want to just use a gene that's got one research paper behind it, put it in our panel, and then a year or 2 years later, a research study comes out and it shows that the gene, the effect we thought a gene has, it doesn't have. And we've been given wrong or misleading information to our clients. So it's really important that we don't give the wrong or misleading information. So we wait for a minimum of 3 peer-reviewed studies on a gene before we include it. Some of the genes in our panel will have more than 10. They'll be really well researched. FTO, ACTN3, ACE, for example, all a lot of research behind them. Some of them will have less, but they'll all have at least 3. It should also be conducted in humans, all this research. Sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it's not always adhered to. Some companies will take promising research done in usually mice or other mammals and then extrapolate that into humans. Now, whilst humans and mice are both mammals, there are differences in the two, and humans are really subject to environmental influences. So it's not as simple as saying this is the case in a mouse, therefore it will be the case in a human. We need human-based studies to be sure that we're correct. And then finally, we have to have a consensus of effect from that research. What does this mean? It means if we say we had 10 research papers behind a gene, 5 said it had one effect, 5 said it had no effect, we probably wouldn't include that gene in our panel, or we'd certainly look at the research a lot closer to grade it in terms of quality, because there's no clear consensus, and the consensus is really, really important. And this is different to other research or other genetic testing companies who quite often will just base their reports on a gene that's perhaps got 1 study behind it, or maybe 2, or maybe it was done in animals, or maybe there's unclear consensus. DNAfit have always been really strict on the criteria required to select a gene. The genes that we test for and give you information on always have to be modifiable through either diet or exercise or both. So this means that if you know what version of a gene you have and it's not a version that you might want, for example, it might be a risk allele for obesity or type 2 diabetes, you can do something about that. So it doesn't mean you're going to get type 2 diabetes or you're going to be obese. It means you can do something in your environment or from your diet or from exercise to offset that. Perhaps a low carbohydrate diet, perhaps reducing your total calorie intake, perhaps doing certain types of exercise. The genes also have to be prevalent. This means that they're not really, really rare. So again, some companies test for gene variants that don't really occur in people. So, for example, there'd be one gene variant which might occur in only 60 to 100 people in the UK. They're probably not having genetic tests done. So, if we're advertising that we offer that test, it's not always that ethical. I think one of the genes that we have in our panel has about 5% prevalence of one version of that, and that's the lowest we go. That's still 1 in 20 people, so it's still pretty common. And they also have to be non-medical. So, we're not starting to give people medical advice about do they need to take this drug, so are they going to get cancer or those type of things. It's not that at all. It's just about lifestyle advice. So we're not talking, for example, about a gene called APOE4. We could talk about that. It's got really good evidence for how well you can deal with saturated fats. And unfortunately, it's also strongly linked to Alzheimer's disease risk. And if you've got the risk version of this gene, your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease is really, really, really high compared to people that don't carry the risk version of that gene. Now, we could just report on it from the fat point of view. That would be fine, but people would get their results, go into Google and find it out that way. And we're not very comfortable with that. That is medical advice or getting towards the realms of medical advice. So we decided not to do that. Similarly, there's loads of breast cancer variants as well. Theoretically, we could test for, but they are medical. They're not modifiable through diet or exercise. So we've left those well alone. So I guess the question is, why do we need a code of practice? Well, first point here is that genetic testing is becoming much more prevalent. Part of the reason it's become more prevalent is because it's become much, much cheaper. It costs $2.7 billion to run the first human genome, and now it's less than $1,000. And then companies like DNAfit are our competitors. They don't run full genome testing, so it gets even cheaper. So because it's cheaper, people are able to afford it. Because people are able to afford it, they're much more likely to do it. And also, people are becoming more aware that you can do this. 10, 15 years ago, people weren't aware of it. Even 2 years ago, now people are starting to become aware that they can get this test done and it can tell them these traits. And going forward, more and more people will do these tests. So really important to get some guidelines in place. It can be a really confusing area for consumers. So people think, oh, I've got this version of this gene, it means I'm going to die 10 years younger, for example, or things like that. It really isn't the case. That's not the case at all. But people perhaps think that. People also perhaps think it's deterministic, so we're using it for talent identification in sport, telling people they're definitely going to suffer from certain injuries. It really, really isn't that at all. So just need to have this code of practice in place so we can better educate consumers and clients to prevent this confusion. There's a lot of bold, overstated claims as well. Not from DNAfit, we're being very hard on ourselves and strict in terms of not having these bold claims, but other companies do have bold, overstated claims, and again, that leads to confusion from consumers. So we need, again, to have this code of practice in place to protect those. There's no real set scientific criteria across the company. So DNAfit, we've just gone through our scientific criteria. Other companies won't have any scientific criteria. They'll be much more lax about that. And that's not good. We should have an industry-wide minimum requirement for a set of evidence before a gene is tested for. And again, that will remove the confusion. It'll protect customers and various clients much, much better. And then finally, there's not really any regulation, or if there is regulation, it's not very good. So nobody is regulating this industry, and that's why there's a lot of confusion. That's why there can be bold, overstated claims and no scientific criteria. And we want to protect the industry and also the consumers. And so we've put this code of practice forward, and hopefully people will start to use it. So that's why we need a code of practice. Because the next question is, what is within the code of practice? So because DNAfit, we're the market leader in the UK and we've got a really large footprint worldwide, we're proposing this and we're putting it forward to industry, and we're really hopeful that the industry will take this on board and start to utilise some of the points in this to improve the whole area. And we really want to lead the way on this. It's really, really important to us. Now, a lot of these things we already do because, like I said, we've been really strict with how we do certain things. We just want other companies to adhere to the same strictness as we do. And there's various points in this code of practice that we've proposed. The first one is that there should be no direct-to-consumer testing for under 18s. This is really important. So even if an under 18 consents to having a test done, or their parents consent to having a test done, we will not provide that test to the under 18. We don't think other companies should either. This is because of ethical considerations. Quite often, if people are testing under 18, they're doing so for a talent ID point of view, and there's no evidence at all that you can use these tests for a talent ID point of view. And also question the maturity of somebody under 18 to be able to place the information they get from the genetic test in the proper context. And so if they're not mature enough and they can't quite understand the information properly, it's safer not to test directly to under 18s. So that's the first point. Second point is that you cannot use genetic testing for talent ID. DNAfit have always said this. If you ever come to an education seminar or watch webinars, we've always said there's no power of a genetic test in talent identification. Can't be used for that. It's not all predictive, won't tell you what sport to do, won't tell you how good you will be at a certain sport. And like I said, we've always said that. I've looked at well over 1,000 different results, different test results, and I've seen test results from Olympic champions, from international footballers, and I've also seen the results from just normal people on the street. And if I can lay the two reports side by side, one from an Olympic champion, one from a normal human being, I can't tell who the Olympic champion is, I can't tell who the human being is. It illustrates really, really nicely there is no diagnostic or talent identification aspect of this test. Can't be used as that. We've always said that, and other companies, we would like to take this on board as well. And this should be really clearly communicated to customers as well. Customers shouldn't think they could use it as a talent ID test. They need to know that they can't. Third point is full disclosure and transparency of gene variants. So we need to make people aware of the gene variants that we're testing for, and that's so they can look at the evidence themselves, place it in the correct context, do a bit of research, talk to medical practitioners, etc. about that. And it enables academics as well to observe the evidence that we're using and comment on that. So really, really important that companies fully disclose their genes and are transparent about that. We list ours on our website. If you want even more information, contact us and we will give you all the RS numbers and all that type of thing as well. There's no secrets at DNAfit. We've got nothing to hide. We're very open about all of this. Point 4, should be a minimum evidence base for all reported gene variants. I've already said we at DNAfit require 3 peer-reviewed studies, other companies require less. We're not saying other companies have to have 3, we're open for discussion about all this type of thing, but what we would like is a minimum base for people to have before they can accept a gene into their panel. That'd be really good. Again, it would protect consumers a bit more, and it protects the industry from outside criticism as well, which is really, really important. Some of the points on this list then. So we think there should be conservative claims. So we've already said that some companies are not quite as conservative as they could be. All companies should clearly state the limitations of fitness and nutrition genetics. So they shouldn't be making bold claims. They should make people aware of the correct context of the results. And again, DNAfit in all our education programs, we've tried to do this really well, and we hope other people will sort of take that on board as well. Point 6 is to only use genetics as a small part of the training picture. So we've already said can't use it as a talent identification tool. It's only there to support your training or your nutrition plans. So it's not going to change your goals at all. It might change how you train very slightly. You might do a bit more in your prevention work. You might focus on recovery a little bit more. Perhaps you have a bit more vitamin D, things like that. And that's all fine. It's all good if you're placing it in the correct context. You can't place all your training programs based on your genetics. Environmental factors are really, really important. Again, in all our education programs, we talk about environmental factors all the time, and we've been really, really big on taking this forward, and hopefully other companies do the same. Point 7, there should be laboratory and data protection standards. So there should be a minimum standard of laboratory that companies are using, and they should make this quite clear to their consumers. We've got a UK-based lab. We'd be quite happy to give people more information on that if they want. Other companies should also do the same. We'd be really keen on that. Same for data protection. If people are giving you their DNA sample, again, there's a lot of apprehension about doing that. People think you can do certain things with DNA. It's perhaps overplayed a little bit, but people are worried, and steps should be taken to sort of mitigate people's worry, and having the correct data protection standards in place is really important. At the end of this presentation, I'll show you or talk you through what the DNAfit data protection standards are. Point 8 is that there should be expert advice available. So if you're selling genetic tests to consumers, you should have experts available to advise the company and also advise your clients if required. So at DNAfit, we've got 3 PhDs in this area working for us as consultants. We've also got a number of people with sporting backgrounds. So I used to be an Olympian, Andrew Steele, my manager used to be Olympian, and 2 people who work alongside me in the sports science department were also Olympians. So we've got a real big background of working in professional sports, so we can take the science and place it in the correct context. And that's really, really important. Point 9 is commercial transparency. So some genetic testing companies will test your genes and then try to sell you supplements or vitamin products to support some issues you may or may not be having. And that's fine, so long as they make you aware that that's what they're doing. So if people are selling a product on top of it, you need to be aware of that at the time. So people just need to be open and transparent about it all. And again, DNAfit will definitely do that. And finally, point 10, there should be mandatory consent. So all customers should sign a consent form. And before signing that consent form, they should be well informed about what they're going to get from the test, its good parts and its limitations, how long it's all going to take, what the cost is, and how to provide it all in its correct context. All those bits we've spoke about already, the consumers need to be made aware of before they sign that consent form. And DNAfit have always requested a consent form to be signed before we test you. If you didn't sign that consent form, we wouldn't have tested your sample. So again, we've been leading the way within that. So we spoke about what the code of practice is. We should probably examine what this means for you, really. So it may well affect how you market the test. It might not, but it might. You definitely cannot market the test to under 18s, and you also cannot use it as a talent ID tool. Shouldn't have been using it as a talent ID tool anyway. Like I said, we've done this to death in all our education programs and in webinars and stuff like that. So you should hopefully have been aware that it had no diagnostic use. That way, you absolutely cannot use it for that now. And you should also be using conservative claims. So you should be placing genetic testing in the correct context in all your marketing and all your discussions with clients. And we'll go through what the correct context will be in a little bit. You also need to ensure that the client is well informed of the process, the claims, and provides consent. So they need to know the things I said in the previous slide, how long it's going to take, how much it costs, what the research is. You need to communicate that to a client properly, and that's really, really important. And ideally as well, we'd like to provide interpretation of the results to a client. So you're not just giving the client their results and sort of backing off and saying, deal with this by yourself. You're providing them with support, you're answering their questions, you're putting it all in the correct context with information that you've learned through the DNAfit education program and the DNAfit Education Institute. And that's why we've got those programs in place, so you can do that. And that's really, really important. So we discussed it might affect how you market the product. Probably a good idea on the back of that to look at our marketing guidelines. So first of all, we need to discuss what the DNAfit test is and what it isn't. And like I've said, and I've done it to death, but it's important that you understand this, it will not tell you what sport you will be successful at. And it shouldn't change your training goal. It will just give you supportive information when designing a training program. Things to do with recovery, fine-tuning certain types of training, how likely you are to be injured, what type of dietary interventions you can make. Fine-tuning things, you're not making massive changes based on this. It won't help on that front. It's not at all deterministic. And again, we've spoken about this already, but it's important to know that it's not going to tell you when you're going to die. It's not going to tell you that you're going to get cancer or various other illnesses. It's just going to give you some advice about how to support your health and fitness a bit more. And the final point is it's not a food tolerance test, as in like a blood test. It will tell you whether you're lactose tolerant or not from a primary standpoint, because that is genetic, and it will tell you your likelihood of developing celiac disease, but it won't tell you if you've got celiac disease. You need an additional test for that. So it's not a blood test, it's just a cheek DNA test. So in terms of practical advice, you always need to remember the environmental influences. So when you're talking to clients, when you're marketing things, always discuss the environmental influences, how important that is when it comes to interpreting your results. Avoid talking in absolute terms. So it's not a case of this test will tell you whether you have celiac disease or not. Like I said, it's telling you your likelihood of developing celiac disease, but it won't tell you whether you've got it or not. Similarly, it's not going to tell you that you will put on this amount of muscle or you will lose this amount of fat with this type of training. It's all very general and all supporting that type of advice that you can give. And again, made this point a few times, but you could clearly communicate to the customer what they can expect to receive in their report, perhaps even show them sample reports, discuss the genes and how long that process will take. Really, really important that that can be done. And so towards the end of the webinar now, we're going to talk about the data protection that DNAfit do. So whenever we test your samples or you send your samples to us, we send them to the lab anonymously. So there's nothing on the sample that can identify it to you. It's tested blindly in the lab. That way it's just tested by your sample number. It just protects you quite nicely. And then once we've finished analysing your sample, which takes about a week, we destroy your DNA. So your DNA is not kept, it's got rid of as per industry standard. We will keep your raw data, we'll keep it securely. We're very keen and we really put a big effort in making sure that it is kept securely, it is secure. And the reason we keep it is so that if you ever lose your PDF reports, we can provide you with new ones free of charge. We're more than happy to destroy your raw data if you so request, and we'll provide you the certificate to say it's been done. But if you then lose or misplace your DNAfit reports, we'll have to retest you for you to get those reports done again. That will cost you money. So it's very secure, but we can also delete your data if you want. And we don't share your data with third parties. And if we were to do that in the future, we would get your consent before we did so. You could opt in or opt out of that. But at the moment, we don't sell your data to any other companies, so you don't need to have anything to worry about there. And like I said, if we ever did, we would get your permission to do so first, and you wouldn't have to give us your permission on that. So what can DNAfit do to help? Well, like I said, we've given you all these guidelines, code of practice, marketing guidelines. We want to help you as much as we can. It's really important to us that you do well from this business, so we will support you all the way through that. More than happy to provide you with the code of practice, more than happy to provide you with the marketing guideline documents. You can just email us, info@DNAfit, or you'll find it near this webinar on the Education Institute as well. Happy to provide you with reference lists of the key studies, all the kind of science pack we have. More than happy to give you that. And at any time you've got a question, you're not sure about something, you want something clarified, email us, info@DNAfit.com, and one of our team will get back to you and make sure that you've got the answer you need and you can feel more confident going forward. Key thing is that we are really, really keen to help you. If you have anything you're not sure about, just let us know, and we'll definitely work together to ensure that you get better results for yourself and also for your clients. Thanks a lot. Hopefully it's been quite helpful and you've got a much more fuller understanding of some of the ethical considerations and marketing considerations you need to understand to take forward. So thanks a lot. Cheers.